Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. It's been a while since making a video on the pyramids of the Giza plateau, and it's actually thanks to my recent deep dive into the enigmatic site of Sacsayhuaman in Peru that's led me back to Egypt. What I'm discussing in this video are the casing stones of the Khafre and Menkaure pyramids, which sit to the southwest of the Great Pyramid. These pyramids often fall in the shadow of their big brother, but they do deserve more attention. They are particularly unusual because, unlike the Great Pyramid, they both had at least in part granite casing stones. The Khafre pyramid had granite casing for its lowermost course around the bottom, up to a height of 41 inches or just over a metre. Vyse said there were two courses, which would double the height of the granite around the base, but this is unconfirmed. We can see surviving examples of the granite casing on the south side of the pyramid. The rest of the structure was cased in Mokattam limestone, a different quality to that used on the Great Pyramid, being harder and greyer and less spectacular in appearance. The smaller Menkaure pyramid was also part cased in granite. Diodorus Siculus stated that this pyramid had 15 courses of the harder pink stone, whilst Flinders Petrie thought there were 16. This means it covered a quarter of the height of the pyramid. The fact that the huge gash in the side that was dug by Arab explorers starts directly above the 17th course also indicates that this was where the granite ended and limestone began. Interestingly, at the base of the eastern side of the Menkaure pyramid, there is also a purpose-built pit lined with shaped granite blocks. Today, this pit is filled with sand. The largest of the three satellite pyramids of Menkaure was also cased in granite. The other two only have their cores exposed and were either unfinished or their casing has been stripped. Either way, it is believed by experts that all three satellite pyramids would have been planned with a granite casing. The granite casing on the mentioned pyramids was finely jointed and would not be out of place in the Inca heartland of Cusco, not to mention the fact we still see stone protrusions on a number of blocks. Looking at pictures from the incredible Isida Project archive, and the cutting and fitting of the granite really is quite astonishing. A tight fit was clearly important. But why do their outer surfaces look rough? Why do we see the protrusions? Why were some areas flattened and others left? It's possible the pyramid was unfinished when Menkaure died, and so maybe the next king didn't put in the effort to give the pyramid the perfect finish. The fact is, the outer appearance of the granite casing does remain a mystery. So, that's a brief description of what we can see in the field, but I rarely see an explanation for why these pyramids had granite casing in the first place. A finished pyramid would look better if it was cased in one type of stone and not two, and so this has led me to believe that the granite was a purely functional addition. Transporting, cutting and fitting Aswan granite to a Giza pyramid was no easy feat. Then, the Egyptians would have also had to shape the limestone ground the granite sits on, because, as seen on the Khafre pyramid, the individual granite casing stones are not all the same height. As Keith Hamilton shows and explains in his fantastic new paper on the Pyramid of Khafre, which I've linked below, the limestone ground was worked, so the tops of the granite casing stone would all be at the same height. So, with all this extra work involved, why did the Egyptians do it? Why did they bother when limestone was so plentiful, easy to work and local to Giza? It must be for a good reason. Granite is a hard stone. It does weather, as we can see by the various types of weathering rind on the casing stones, but it's hard to erode, has a very low porosity and permeability, and therefore I propose the granite was added for protection from water. It's important to note that weathering and erosion are two different things. As a side note, the reason the granite at Giza has this strange flaky coating on the outside is all because of weathering. It happens in part due to chemical reactions. For For example, plagioclase crystals, a key constituent of granite, gets altered to gibbsite kaolinite assemblages. Granitic weathering rinds are found to be silica, sodium, calcium, rubidium and strontium deficient, and it does have different properties to the fresh granite behind it. The longer the granite has been exposed to the elements and atmosphere, the thicker the rind becomes, and such rinds can be found to be 2 meters in thickness on some outcrops around the world. Chemical weathering mainly occurs because of a salty and moist environment, as well as interactions with the atmosphere itself. Then there is physical and biological weathering on top of the chemical. And, altogether, stone monuments, whatever the rock type, do break down over time, and it all depends on the environment. Even granite can deteriorate in less time than we think. For example, weathering has extensively altered the unfinished obelisk at Aswan. You can see aggressive disintegration forms, and this is from environmental factors, such as variation in air temperature, moisture values and different anthropogenic effects, as well as the seepage of water. The disposal of solid waste at the site over the years, not to mention recent pollution, has all led to chemical reactions. In the image on the left, we see surface disintegration on the obelisk from weathering, and, on the right, is surface oxidation and salt efflorescence. Red spots and also crusts are the major deterioration forms on the unfinished obelisk. The cut granite surfaces on the casing stones at Giza also show a variety of weathering types because of the environment, and the development of disintegration forms and the crust are 2 such examples. Back to the subject of this video, and my idea that granite casing was added for protection from water came to me whilst researching Sacsayhuaman, and I believe the polygonal masonry style was adopted for sites that would be in the vicinity of water. To be clear, I don't believe polygonal masonry was used exclusively for sites subject to water. I assume it was used on the Inca palaces in Cusco, an example being the wall of the Inca Roca Palace, because it was stable, earthquake-proof, and also because it looked spectacular. At Sacsayhuaman though, in the region around the Cocochincanas Reservoir, the numerous small basins and wells were lined with tightly fitted polygonal masonry. And I assume this was to minimise seepage and to create the most watertight seal possible. This idea could therefore be applied to the Giza pyramids. The use of finely jointed granite for the base of 2 pyramids, and at least 1 satellite pyramid, could well be to protect the structures from water, and to minimise weathering and erosion of the limestone core. This would ensure the pyramids had and maintained their structural integrity. Furthermore, the chambers of both the Khafre and Menkaure pyramids are at or below ground level, and so they needed extra protection to prevent floodwater seeping into the pyramid chambers. This idea is all well and good, but, of course, when we think of ancient Egypt, we often think of the dry desert landscape with camels walking through the sand in front of the Great Pyramids, whilst the Great Sphinx looks out towards the baking Egyptian sun. It is an arid, barren desert landscape, so why do these pyramids need protection from water? And why didn't the Great Pyramid also have granite casing around the base? These questions do need answering, and I've delved into paleo-environmental records of Egypt to explain. Egypt wasn't always a dry, arid desert environment. In pre-dynastic times, records showed that Egypt was relatively wet. There was high rainfall, the Nile River was deeper, and the annual inundation did drown more land. But a long-term decline in rainfall and the gradual drying of the Egyptian hinterland all began around 4000 BC. At the end of the pre-dynastic era, as well as in early dynastic times, rainfall was low, and the Nile inundation was far lower than usual. The Old Kingdom is even thought to have come to an end because of drought. From around 2200 BC at the end of the Old Kingdom, and then throughout the First Intermediate Period from around 2180 to 2134 BC, there was growing disorder, huge civil unrest, social revolts and rebellions. A number of experts believe that this was the result of low Nile floods, meaning the inundation wasn't watering enough land and therefore the harvests were devastated. One account of the day says, all of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger, to such an extent that everyone has come to eating his children. The entire country had become starved, just like a starved grasshopper, with people going to the north and to the south in search of grain. This shows that however powerful Egypt was earlier in the Old Kingdom, it was still an incredibly fragile society. And unless they had a solution, no pharaoh, however powerful, can control a nation that's starving. A people without food are a desperate people hard to control. We do have a good indication of the behaviour of the Nile from the analysis of sediments of the Holocene lakes of the Fayum region. The Nile floods primarily fed these lakes, and so high lake levels are a direct indication of high floods and a good and plentiful inundation. As stated, we find out there was a decline in pre-dynastic and early dynastic times, but then we see an 18 to 22 metre rise in lake levels in the Old Kingdom. In comparison, just a few hundred years later at the end of the Old Kingdom, and throughout the First Intermediate Period, lake sediments recorded a very serious decline. This means that Nile inundations were at their highest during the Pyramid Age, and if low floods do lead to nationwide hunger, disorder, civil unrest, social revolts and rebellions, record high floods could well mean the opposite, a time of prosperity, plentiful food in excess of what was expected or needed. What we know is that the Pyramid Age was a wet period. This diagram by Fekri Hassan shows the levels of Lake Moeris at Fayum through history, and we can see just how wet the 4th dynasty was compared to other eras of history. Rainwater in Ethiopia is a major source for the Nile inundation, but there were often corresponding wet periods in Egypt as well, adding to the height of the Nile flood. The high inundation of the 4th dynasty is thought to coincide with more rainfall in Egypt as well as Ethiopia. The inundation could never reach the margins of the pyramid, they never reached that high on the Giza plateau, and that's the same whether you believe the pyramids are pre-dynastic or 4th dynasty in origin. Sediment analysis shows that water levels never got that high, even during the African humid period. And so, with that in mind, what is the granite on the pyramids protection from? The answer is flash floods, surface runoff water cascading across the plateau. This happened in pre-dynastic times, throughout dynastic history, and it still even happens in the modern era, although far less frequently. These are the same surface runoff flash floods that eroded the western wall of the Sphinx enclosure, as well as the western end of the southern wall. These are the same surface runoff waters that caused major damage to the original Menkaure Valley Temple as noted by Mark Lehner. The first Valley Temple was composed of mud brick, completed by Menkaure's successor Shepseskaf. The later second temple and renovation of the first was built more than 200 years later, probably by Pepi II of the 6th dynasty. During his excavations in the early 20th century, George Reisner found evidence that a desert flash flood streamed down the northern side of the causeway and washed out the centre of the first temple's western wall, destroying the portico and offering hall. After this took place, the Menkaure Valley Temple was abandoned. Eventually, people returned and rebuilt the outer wall, marked here on the diagram as Water Wall. This was a fieldstone construction and was added for protection. As a side issue, it is strange to learn that the Menkaure Pyramid, a respectably sized pyramid, well made with concave faces like the Great Pyramid, and part cased in Aswan granite, did have a valley temple made of mud brick. According to the Ancient Egyptian Research Associates website, there is evidence that Menkaure wanted to build a stone temple, and also that he did even start it. At the temple there are large limestone core blocks, like those seen on the Khafre Valley Temple, and these may well have been planned to be covered in granite. Work seems to have stopped abruptly, and the temple completed in mud brick, possibly because Menkaure died. This may also explain the unfinished appearance of the granite casing stones on the pyramid. Whatever the truth, it is another strange anomaly. Mud brick wasn't a durable material like stone, but it wasn't completely ineffective against the elements. The fact that a Giza flash flood did destroy it shows just how damaging water from such phenomenon can be. We know that such a flood happened between Menkaure's reign and the 6th dynasty, and that's because we can date the two temples. So it means the flood happened between 2550 BC and 2200 BC, according to conventional dating. But such flash floods could well have happened many times a year for consecutive years during the Old Kingdom's wet phase. This all shows that rainfall in Egypt did have devastating effects on structures on the Giza Plateau. The 4th dynasty Wall of the Crow, an enormous construction, was built to protect the workers' village from flash floods. The Sphinx enclosure has also been badly eroded by flash floods as well, likely before the Great Pyramid was even built, because this damage had to have been done before the quarrying to the west, as shown by these flow diagrams produced by Colin Reeder. I would also suggest the Khafre Valley Temple was also covered with a granite casing to protect it from waters of the inundation, being right on the edge of an ancient harbour, and also from surface runoff. But even with all this information, why case these two pyramids with granite when they also had retaining walls? Well, when you think of the size of the pyramids, Khafre's being huge and Menkaure's being smaller but still an enormous structure, they would directly capture a lot of rainwater. Water that would fall and run down the sides of the pyramid and then pool at the bottom, inside the boundary wall before draining away. Flash floods at Giza meant intense rain, a large volume of water that fell in a short space of time. Therefore, the pyramid still needed protection from standing water, especially because the two pyramids in question also had subterranean chambers. This also explains the pit on the eastern side of the Menkaure pyramid. I propose that this granite-lined pit was a drain. It would be interesting to know if the pavement around the pyramid does slope into the pit, even if ever so slightly, because that would be the optimal way to reduce water damage and drain the excess standing water. Experts who have studied the Khafre pyramid have shown the architects did consider water and drainage before and during construction, with sloping terrace platforms on the northeast and southwest corners, sloping to take water away from the pyramid. The Khafre pyramid's boundary wall was 8 metres high, but as this diagram shows, a large torrent of water from the west could easily breach this wall, and so there was a need to case the base of this pyramid with granite. We should also consider that the boundary walls around the pyramids may not have been part of the primary architectural plan. They could have been a later addition, maybe added during a renovation, and we know that such renovations did take place in dynastic history, maybe during the 18th or 26th dynasties, to give the pyramids more protection from flash floods. So this all seems logical, and to me this hypothesis does work. But why doesn't the Great Pyramid have granite casing at the bottom as well? Well, this can be explained in a number of ways. For a start, maybe it should have. Maybe it was an oversight by the architect. This video clip showing Youssef Aouyan was sent to me by Twitter user Plastolithic Past. I'm not sure if it comes from a video by Uncharted X or NEXT or anywhere else, but Youssef shows and describes the lowermost casing stones on the west side of the Great Pyramid, and we can all see they are heavily eroded. On the opposite side, the east side, the casing stones still look sharp. This is because the Giza plateau slopes at roughly a 6-degree angle from the northwest to southeast, and so any stormwater falling to the northwest of the Great Pyramid would flow into its westernmost side, whilst the pyramid itself would protect the east side. Again, maybe this also indicates that originally there was no boundary wall around the pyramid. We also know there is what was once described by antiquarians as a well, just next to the pyramid, but this could also be another pyramid drain. Maybe the damage at the base of the Great Pyramid was becoming apparent to the architects of the next two pyramids, and so they learned from it and adapted their own designs accordingly. As we know, the Great Pyramid's main internal compartments are above ground, high inside the pyramid. Granite casing around the base therefore wasn't needed. The subterranean chamber does look abandoned, unused and unfinished, which, as explained in the past, I believe is because it was dug as a contingency. I don't think that this chamber was ever used, and so the architect didn't need to worry about granite casing on the lower courses. But the internal chambers of the Khafre and Menkaure pyramids were at or below ground level, and so, after seeing the damage to the Great Pyramid, after seeing the unpredictable and devastating effects of flash floods at Giza, the architects likely opted to give these pyramids more protection in the form of granite. Furthermore, both the Khafre and Menkaure pyramids would have been in the firing line of far more runoff water. There is a large patch of land to the northwest of these pyramids, and it also slopes towards them, and so a large amount of water would be heading for these two pyramids during a storm. Looking at topographical maps, and the Great Pyramid was more protected, there was no major high ground to the northwest, and rainwater would flow in different directions. Therefore, extra protection was needed for the two smaller pyramids at Giza, as well as the satellite pyramids of Menkaure. I don't know if anyone else has come up with this idea before me, that granite casing was included to protect these pyramids from flash floods, but as stated, the idea came to me after my recent work on Sacsayhuaman. It all seems to make sense, the observations do seem to fit, and the evidence all comes together to add credence to the theory. Like most things, this line of study is a work in progress, and there is still a lot more to research, but I'd love to know your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.